There we go. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming out here tonight. My name is Julia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on the events team here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, I just want to share a few quick logistics. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at the event. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A toward the end of the talk, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Mary Laura is going to be signing and personalizing books at the desk all the way at the back of the store. Oh, just dropped some. Sorry about that. We also have additional books available to purchase up at the register where you came in. If you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Bomb Shelter online. You can use the link in the live stream description to do so. All right, with all of that out of the way, I'm very excited to introduce Mary Laura Philpott and Liz Egan, who are here celebrating the release of Mary Laura's new book, Bomb Shelter. Early on in Bomb Shelter, Mary Laura's memoir and essays, she writes about what she calls looking directly at sadness in books. She says, "Looking made me feel profound sorrow, and while I didn't enjoy sorrow itself, I was amazed to know the depth of it." Throughout Bomb Shelter, Mary Laura dives into the depths of sorrow and her own anxieties that loss is just over the horizon, but she has an incredible talent for simultaneously bringing hope into the conversation. Mary Laura's capacity for optimism and humor make her writing impossible to put down and invite us to look directly at her sadness, her warmth, her joys, and so much more. Bomb Shelter is the kind of book that you'll want to share with all the people in your life, and we're so thrilled to be able to share it with you all tonight. In addition to Bomb Shelter, Mary Laura is the author of the national bestseller, I Miss You When I Blink. Her writing has been featured frequently by the New York Times and also appears in the Washington Post, The Atlantic, Paris Review Daily, the Oprah Magazine, and other publications. Additionally, Mary Laura is a former bookseller and was for several years a co-host of A Word on Words, the literary interview program on Nashville Public Television. And as mentioned, Mary Laura is joined in conversation tonight by Liz Egan. Liz is an editor at the New York Times Book Review and the author of A Window Opens. So, without further ado, everyone please give a very warm welcome to Mary Laura and Liz.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you. Mary Laura, welcome to Brooklyn.
Thank you. What a day.
I know it's been
Goodness.
a long day on many fronts. And I just thought I would begin with a moment of acknowledgement that you are a book lover,
Yes,
a veteran bookseller,
indeed.
a lifelong person of words. And I'm wondering if you could just start by telling us what it means to you right now to be sitting in this room full of books and people who I can just tell by looking at them that they love books also. So talk a little bit about what that's like for you after this past 2 years. And can everyone hear?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can hear me as well? Yeah. Good. It feels like a miracle. There's seats up here if anybody needs them. It feels like a miracle. The timing of the fact that the last time I was in these seats was 2019, right before the pandemic happened. And then now this is out and I'm here just as things are opening up. That just feels miraculous to me. And that 2.5 year period where I had so many dear friends who were putting out books and they couldn't go meet their readers and they couldn't go see people was just a heartbreaking thing to witness. So it feels wonderful. And it also, one of the things I love about bookstores, because they attract readers and they attract people who are willing to give the time it takes to sit with a book and absorb all the words in a book. There are people who are naturally willing to think slowly and carefully and appreciate nuance and appreciate things, feelings that are complicated and situations that don't always have an easy solution. And I feel like those are qualities that are in shorter and shorter supply lately in the world. So it's nice to be in a hub of people who are willing to do that. I wish everyone would slow down a little bit and appreciate more nuanced thinking.
I second that. It's miraculous to me to think that you wrote a book during the pandemic, and I'm assuming in a time of deep quarantine and stress and uncertainty. Maybe walk us through what that looked like when you started, and if you remember the first morning that you sat down in front of your empty screen or your empty legal pad and just dove in.
There was a big difference between the parts of this book that I wrote at the end of 2019, which I wrote in the way I always wrote, which was like little snippets of time here and there when I could, when I was home, when I wasn't going somewhere. My writing life was a little inconsistent. And then the parts of the book that I wrote in 2020 and the first half of 2021, those parts, the pandemic parts, I had the most consistent, like long and consistent work days that I've ever had. Because obviously I couldn't go anywhere, and I was not just in my house, but kind of tied to one room, because I had one kid on Zoom school over here and the other kid on Zoom school over here, and then my husband was doing Zoom work in another room. So it was like, I get this corner of the house. I could sit at the kitchen table, or I could go sit on the back porch. That's where I could work, and I have such vivid memories of that immersive time. Like there's a chapter in Bomb Shelter where I write about a memory that I hadn't forgotten. I just really hadn't brought it up lately. When I was in second grade, and this was early 80s, like the height of stranger danger time, when everyone was like, you're all going to be kidnapped at any time. It's just bound to happen. A girl in my neighborhood was kidnapped in the classic stranger danger. A man broke into her house and took her kind of way. And I was little. So, little kids kind of absorb what is being said around them, but it's only like half the information, and we kind of metabolize it very weirdly. But I remember, in order to write that chapter, I had to kind of re-immerse myself in what that time was like. So I was sitting on my back porch all day for 3 days in a row, watching news footage of the Adam Walsh disappearance, and then watching the made-for-TV movie that Hollywood made about it after, the case was over. And that was such a bizarre thing to immerse myself in while this pandemic is happening. It was just a bizarre experience. But I remember it so vividly. It was so different from any other time in my writing life.
There's one essay in this book that, all of the essays, I don't know how many people here have had a chance to read Bomb Shelter, but there is one essay that just embedded itself in my my brain as I was reading, and even now, months after I read the book, I feel like I could probably quote passages from it. Can you guess which one I'm talking about?
No, but I would like to hear you quote passages.
No, I'm not going to. It's called Hurry, Hurry.
Oh, yes.
And it creates a real through line throughout the book. I'm wondering if you could describe, if you don't mind. It's all of these essays are very personal, but this essay in particular is about as personal as it gets.
It's the one.
Let's go there.
Yes. My cheeks are going to turn red while I talk about it, because I'm still getting used to talking about it out loud. So Hurry, Hurry is the third chapter in the book. It's the chapter that describes the big thing that happens, that sets the clock ticking, that sets the sort of narrative tension in motion that pulls the rest of the book along. And that is kind of in a time period of my life where I was already starting to worry about the fact that my babies weren't babies anymore. They were teenagers. Oh my gosh, they're going to graduate one day, go out in the world, and how can they be that old? Speaking of old, how can I be this old? And how are my parents getting this old, and what is happening next for all of us? I was already in this sort of unstable, life is changing moment. And then one morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, my husband and I sat upright in bed. We heard this noise that I thought at the time was someone ramming down our front door. I don't know why that is what my brain was like. That's what it is. Someone ramming down our front door.
Stranger danger.
Right, stranger danger, exactly. My brain was like, oh wait, I know what this is. We got up and investigated, and my husband saw something and ran down the hall, and it turned out to be my teenage son. The sound we were hearing was his body hitting the bathroom floor. He had gotten up to get a glass of water, as he often does at 4 a.m., and he took a couple of steps into the bathroom and just dropped cold on the tile floor. And what we were hearing was his body hitting the floor again and again and again because he was having a seizure, a really big, violent seizure. And so in that chapter, I tell the story of seeing him there. And the perspective in this book, I should say, is all 100% through my eyes. This is not a story about my son. This is not a story about my family. It's a story about a woman going through this thing. So you see him the way I see him, which is that I walked into the bathroom and I saw his feet. That's what I could see first. And the first thing I thought is, oh, his feet are so big. I need to get him new shoes. No, I don't need to get him new shoes. I need to call 911. Wait, what is happening? And I had this back in my 20s, 20 years ago. I was a copywriter for a children's hospital. So I used to write educational materials for parents about like how to make sure your children eat vegetables and what to do if you break your arm. And one of the things I had written was what to do if someone is having a seizure, and it just bubbled up out of nowhere in my subconscious. This is a seizure. And I stood there and told my husband what to do. And I said, put something under his head. Don't hold him down. Don't put anything in his mouth. I'm going to go call 911. And I ran back to my room and called 911. Anyway, that chapter kind of tells the story of the 911 call and the ambulance coming. And by the end of that day in the hospital, we knew he had epilepsy, which just came completely out of the blue. No one saw that coming. And so that put the whole mood I was kind of in at that time of life into a different gear. Because now it wasn't just, oh gosh, my kids are going to go out in the world and have to be away from me on their own. It was also, anything could happen to them at any time. The world is so full of danger. And let's see, he's in 10th grade now. I've got 2 years to make sure he's perfectly safe and well before he leaves the house. And so the natural anxieties I had around all this stuff just went into overdrive.
That essay reminded me of, I think one of the reasons that we are here together today is that we are in a similar phase of life. We have kids who are around the same age. I think I have one who's a little bit older, but this whole book and that essay in particular reminded me of a poem that all three of my kids had the same 4th grade teacher who at back to school night read a poem by Khalil Gibran. And I want to read you just a few lines, if you'll indulge me.
I know what poem
Because
this is going to be.
This, I have 2 little bits to read from it. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. And
I love that.
I do too. And when I heard it when my kids were in 4th grade, I was like, whatever, I know that already. And now that I have a 21-year-old, I really know that already.
Read it and ball. Yeah.
But you're getting at something in this book that I don't think we see that often in nonfiction, which is an incredibly honest look of from a parent at kids in this phase of life. So not that many people have the guts to do it. Lots of people write about their toddlers and their babies, and it's safe. They don't have an opinion. It may or may not be fair, but anyway, this is a long way of asking how you navigated those shoals of getting their approval, or what my kids always tell me I'm violating their HIPAA regulations. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. First I need to tell you, I knew you were going to say that poem. My husband and his twin sister, when they were little, found that poem in a book in their house, and they showed it to their little brother, and they said, you see this line, your children are not your children? that's because you're adopted. And they convinced him, even though he looked exactly like them, they all looked like each other, that he was not their children. Anyway, I love that poem too.
That's like peak 1980s.
So 1980s.
And it was an unkind time.
Right, it really was. That it makes me cry too. So that's a great question. Boundaries were super, super important to me in this book. This is a book, like I said, everything I write is through my own perspective, my own eyeballs, and I've resisted up to now writing about any part of my life that really overlaps with anybody else. I'm not interested in writing anybody else's story. I'm very interested in protecting the privacy of people I know. Generally, if I am telling a story and there's part of it that overlaps with somebody else, I just leave that part out. But there was no way to do what I'm doing in Bomb Shelter, which is not a book all about family or all about my kids or even all about this thing that happened, but this was so important to setting in motion everything that came after that I knew I needed to tell that and a few other things from our family. So the test that I use to make sure that I'm keeping the perspective where it needs to be in a given scene is the Once Upon a Time test. So once I've written the scene, I read it, and if I feel like I can describe that scene by saying, once upon a time there was a woman who blah, 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 this happened and she felt this, then I'm good. If I have veered into once upon a time there was a boy who, or once upon a time there was a girl who, or whatever, and I've made it a story about the journey of that character, that's not what I'm trying to do, and I have to scrap it and start over. So that was kind of the boundary I set for myself, and making sure anytime I was in a scene that included other people, it really stayed anchored in my perspective. And then in addition to that, once I had a draft of the actual book, which my family knew I was working on the whole time, and were, encouraging me, but once I had an early draft before I sent it to Trish, my editor, I had them all read it. And they were actually really helpful about helping me remember certain things, and no, this happened first before that happened. Everybody was just really wonderfully supportive of it. And they're also, the kids are old enough now, like one of them actually is an adult and one is almost an adult, so I felt like they could give meaningful consent. And they were excited about it. My husband was on board from the beginning. He was the one before I even started adding that part into this book that said, you've got to write about it. You have to write about it. So they were very gracious and generous in their support at the same time that I was being super guarded with my boundaries. I mean, you notice I don't name anybody other than my husband, whose name is John, which I figure everybody just thinks I made that up anyway. John's a good fake name. I don't name anybody. So.
Yeah, I thought you threaded the needle so respectfully, and I felt like I knew the family, but absolutely, if you're not interested in books about family, you'll still love this book. That's not the point of the book. The point is about what I think this week Susan Cain, who wrote Quiet, just published a new book called Bittersweet, and this book captures, I think, what she's exploring in that book, this phenomenon of bittersweetness. Can you, just to build on the last question, hopefully you'll be out in the world in real life talking about this book, not just this week, but next week and for the months that follow. Do you have certain guardrails in your mind about where you will go and where you will not go? Like the people who have questions about epilepsy, the people who have treatment questions, the people who have opinions about someone here has an opinion. Mm-hmm. Do you have a rule of thumb about how you'll handle that?
I don't really need a rule because it's just super obvious that I'm not an expert in anything medical. Yeah. In fact, in the acknowledgments of this book, I'm like, I am not a medical expert. Nothing in this is medical advice. There are a few medical scenes in this book, and I have a lot of medical anxiety, so you can read a lot about how scared I am of many things that could happen to a human body, but I couldn't give anybody advice on anything. I have already had among early readers some people reach out and say, I know someone with epilepsy, or my child had epilepsy, or my dad had epilepsy, and we did this, and I always just go, great, I hope that's working, because epilepsy is a catch-all term, kind of like cancer, but even more of a catch-all. It just means has seizures. So there are just tons of different seizure disorders that are called epilepsy, but that are actually utterly different things that happen to you. So, when people do try to engage me, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's your thing, and this is our thing. I don't know. I can just tell you what happened to my kid. I can tell you tomorrow when I'm in Washington D.C., we have the CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation coming to our event at East City Books, which is really neat. I just reached out to her and I was like, if you want, she lives in D.C. I was like, if you want to come to this event, you can. I'm very grateful to that website because that is early on. We went to it's epilepsy. I think it's epilepsy.org. Look it up, Epilepsy Foundation. They have great videos and educational materials about what to do if you see someone having a seizure, because it's not necessarily what you think you should do.
Can you tell us about the significance of the turtle on the cover?
Yes, I can. I love him. So this turtle, we call him Frank. I don't know what his mama named him, probably not Frank, but that's what we call him. And he is a wild eastern box turtle who lives in our backyard, has always lived in our backyard. Turtles do not change locations. They stay within a certain number of yards of where they were born. So he has probably lived there. He's probably older than me. We don't know. But we see him every spring and summer and fall. And then in the winter, I think he goes under the leaves. He does whatever turtles do in the winter. And there was a period of time a few years ago, he went through a phase where he knocked on our front door, which was weird and funny, but also kind of disruptive because he started doing it earlier and earlier in the morning. And there were a few weeks where he was knocking at 3. And my husband was like, I gotta go move Frank. Go down there, move him to the grass. And I wrote about that for the New York Times. And at the time I wrote that piece, I left out so much of what was going on in our life and how I was searching for meaning in this turtle visit. I was like, it is an omen. What does it mean? What does it symbolize? What if they come to tell us? Because I was in this moment where I was just like, I need meaning and I need something to make sense. I left all that out at the time, but the expanded version of that essay in this book gets into that. Anyway, I love Frank. We feel about him as if he is a family member, even though we don't own him. We can't control him. We don't bring him in the house. And he almost did not make the cover because when we were finalizing this cover, it was spring, not quite summer. He hadn't come out of hibernation. And all the iPhone photos that I sent to the art department at Simon & Schuster apparently were not quite high res enough to use on a cover. And so they used a model turtle, and she was beautiful, but she was not Frank. And I was sort of bummed about it, but it would have been fine. And one Friday afternoon, they sent me the cover, and they were like, all right, you have the weekend to get used to this. And then on Monday, we need to go ahead and finalize it. So that Sunday, I was out in my backyard gardening and digging things up, and Frank just came walking out from the bushes. And I dropped my shovel, and I ran in the house, and my daughter took a picture of me with my camera. You can see this on my website, lying on my stomach in my gardening overalls with one gardening glove still on. I took 500 glamour shots of Frank, and one of them is right there. There he is.
You're an artist on top of everything.
Right. And I love, he has a shell. He has what we don't have. We don't have this hard protective mechanism built in that keeps us safe. He does. We don't, so we come up with all sorts of pretend ones in our minds that we think protect us.
I don't know what you're talking about.
No.
Mine work perfectly. Tell me a little bit about your decision to write, to tell this story, because it really does read like a story. It is a cohesive unit. Tell me about your decision to write it in essay form rather than as a straight up memoir, or even as a novel. I'm sure that entered the conversation at some point, or no?
I've never done fiction.
Okay.
When I start to do fiction, it kind of goes once upon a time there was a made-up person who, just kidding, it was me. Here's what happened. I can't sustain the imagination. I knew, first of all, I write essays because that is just what I know how to do, and it's how my brain organizes information, and it's how my brain organizes feelings, and it always has been. I like the constraints of 2,000 or 3,000 words. If you give me this nice boundary, I can bounce around within that boundary and do tricks and land somewhere interesting. But if you don't give me a boundary, I will just wander, eternally into God knows where. So I like the boundaries of essays. I did know from the outset that I wanted this to read more like a memoir. we actually had this whole nerdy discussion about will it be categorized as essay collection or memoir, and it is categorized as memoir. But it's made out of essays. I studied while I was writing this book because I had these longer work days where, I was at home, but I can't write. I don't know about you. I get to about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and nothing that's coming out is good. So
For me, that's like 8 a.m.
It is. So I would break and eat lunch. And then in the afternoons I called it afternoon story school, where I would read with a pencil in my hand books of just all different genres by people I know and admire and like, just to kind of study how do they tell stories. So I was reading, thrillers and romance and just everything to study, how do other people make good dialogue work? How do other people sustain suspense in a story? How do people do plot twists? So I think that the elements of storytelling here probably reflect all that studying that I was doing at the time in my own little nerdy, happy way.
What advice do you have for somebody sitting in this room right now who is working on their own, possibly secret project and feeling that they might never reach the end or it might not be worth the trouble? What do you have to say to them?
Gosh, well, first of all, we know that feeling, right? That is, everyone feels that. I think I would point out that you are a writer. You have a writing career. I'm looking into the camera, YouTube, you have a writing career. Even before you have a contract, even before you are earning money and you have a book deal or whatever it is you're writing, a movie, before you have that deal in hand, if you are doing the work, you are a writer. You have a writing career. You're just at the part on the train track of career. You're over here before the contract. And I wish I had fully internalized that for many of the years before I had books, because I kept pushing my writing last after everything else, after my day job, after my family responsibilities, after whatever else I had taken on. This is my hobby, so it gets the leftover time. But it makes sense that, of course, you don't have a contract until you've written something, but you're doing the work before. You have a writing career then. So to the extent you can prioritize it, which I realize is kind of hard because we do all have day jobs and other responsibilities, and tell yourself, I'm doing this because it is my job. Whether or not anyone else has given you permission or said, this is your job now, I have given you money. If you've decided it's your job, it's your job.
Do you have a writing community? Are you in a writing group, and how does it work?
I am. I have the writing community at large, made possible by the internet, which is wonderful, and Twitter. And it's so funny. I don't know where a lot of my writing friends live because they live in my computer and they live in my phone. And I can tell you, oh, her dad is going through cancer treatment and she just got a puppy. And if you said, where does she live? I would go, I don't know. In Twitter, that's where my friends live. So I have that greater, larger writing community. But then Nashville is a wonderfully artistic, cultured town, and I have lots of friends who also write. I have a writing group of five writers who we actually haven't gotten together so much this year since the world opened up. Now our schedules are busy again, but for years we've gotten together almost every week. And at the height of the pandemic, when it was like you can't be around people, we still met outside. We would put a fire in my fireplace outside, and we would sit socially distanced. We'd put our chairs 6 feet apart in our parkas, and we would read each other our work across the fire, yelling out drafts of things. And it makes a strange, lonely job feel less lonely. And it also makes it makes your work better when you can bounce it off someone who also goes through the rigors of this kind of thinking.
You mentioning your Twitter friend's dad reminded me of your dad, about whom I'm gonna wing it. Who you learned something really fascinating about your dad while you were working on this book. Now, I don't want to ask you to give away all the great, there are a lot of surprises in Bomb Shelter, but actually the surprise about your dad did, I think, inspire the title.
Oh, yes.
So would you feel comfortable revealing? Okay.
Yes, it's one of the chapters we excerpted, so it's out
yes.
there. People may have already read it. A few years ago, I was actually on the phone with my dad, who is a surgeon. He's a scientist, and he lives in Georgia. And when I used to work for an indie bookstore, he always made a big deal of ordering his books from the indie bookstore and announcing that he was doing it. Like, here I am ordering my book from a local shop. And we were on the phone one day, and he said, oh, there's a book I want. Perhaps you could order it for me from the local shop. It's by Garrett M. Graff, and it's called Raven Rock. The story of the U.S. government's plan to save itself while the rest of us die. And I was like, Dad, that is so your kind of book. You love that wacky sci-fi stuff. And he was like, no, it's nonfiction. It's about the secret government bunkers during the Cold War where they would take the president if there was an atomic bomb. And I was like, oh, that is interesting. That sounds like your kind of thing. And he was like, yeah, because, it reminds me of when I worked there. And I was like, when you worked where, Dad? And he was like, there, at Raven Rock. And I was early 40s. Can't remember exactly how old I was, but 4 decades into life. And he had never mentioned this. And this was going on. He was working in the secret underground bunker while I was a toddler, like in my life. And so one of the things I write about in that chapter is suddenly going back and looking at my childhood and seeing these scenes of like, okay, so in the morning, when I was sitting at the table having a Pop-Tart, and my dad was walking out the door going, bye guys, and my mom is there, and my baby brother is in the high chair, he was going underground to do test runs for the end of the world, which, had they been needed, had the siren sounded or whatever, would have meant he went into the bunker and we were left up here. Like, it rearranged everything in my memory about childhood, and I called him back to talk to him about it, and he's just of this generation where you do what your country asks of you, and you do your duty, and that was his job, and that was what he was asked to do, was to be the doctor for the bunker, and he would have gone because that's what he needed to do. And I kept going, but Dad, the existential weight of it all. How did you carry that? And he would just give the phone to my mom. And my mom was like, I know. He would go out the door and I would be like, what are we, lunch meat? I mean, it was just one of those things that made me realize there are burdens our parents carry and carried when we were little that we knew nothing about. Just like we carry burdens that our children know nothing about. We all carry burdens that our friends know nothing about or our colleagues know nothing about. We are all doing all sorts of heavy, heavy emotional work that the people we interact with every day don't know about. And one of the things that I've worked through repeatedly in this book is having empathy for other people, and trying to imagine, okay, what might have made them do that thing they did? What might have made them act that way in that scene? And this was an example of going, okay, well, here's a person I've known really well my whole life, and there's this whole thing about him that I never knew until now. I didn't know when I was in college. He used to send me these care packages that were boxes full of canned food with no note, not like brownies, but like canned fruit, canned vegetables, canned meat. And my roommate and I would get them. We literally would joke, oh, look, this bomb shelter boxes. He's sending us a survival stockpile. Why does he do this? He's such a wacky scientist. And now I look back and I'm like, to him, the time elapsed since I was a little toddler and he was working at that bunker and I was a college freshman went like that. And so his way of working through my leaving home and being gone was, well, we're going to make sure she's got shelf-stable food products.
It would be wonderful if there were more people in the world who led with empathy, which is front and center in Bomb Shelter. Tell me about your relationship with the concept of bittersweetness, and also how it relates to growing up as a writer. Because I do think that if you're somebody who's inclined towards stories and words, you probably spend more time grilling your parents about aspects of their lives that they aren't at least in my mother's case, interested in sharing at all. And I'm constantly trying to excavate some great family secret that she's like, Liz, why are you asking me again?
See, you're a better and more interested daughter than I am, because I went through childhood just going, whatever I see is what it is. Okay, I don't need to question anything, which is probably why when I do learn things about my parents' past, I'm like, what? So you're telling me you did more than just hang out with me at the dinner table all those years? Bittersweetness to me is, it's, I can't wait to read Susan Cain's book, first of all, because I've read the subtitle. I'm like, yes, I'm into it. It's the essence of life. I mean, I feel like every minute we're living, there is something amazing happening right in front of us and in our lives, and also something horrible. I mean, look at today. There's a shooting on the subway. That is horrible and scary. And also there's war and climate change and a pandemic. Also, we are gathered here in this beautiful room with our friends. And somebody probably had a birthday this week. And, there's wonderful things and horrible things happening all at the same time. And I've always been drawn to playing those off each other and seeing, when they interact with each other in our hearts and in our heads, what does that feel like? And trying to articulate it. And it's one of my favorite things in a book or a movie. And when I am consuming some sort of entertainment, I love to get the hard cry and the hard laugh, like in the same experience. I love to light up that whole emotional circuit board.
You have lit up that emotional circuit board for me, and I hope for many people here. We're going to start taking questions in a minute, but before we do, I have one just sort of selfish question because I work at the New York Times Book Review. I'm curious about your relationship.
Which is my favorite place in the
world.
world.
Good. I'm curious about your relationship with reviews. Do you read all of them? And most interestingly to me, do you read the Amazon reviews and the Goodreads reviews? Okay,
so Amazon and Goodreads, absolutely not. That's not my business. No, I don't even know my Goodreads password. I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to know it, but I don't. And that's for readers to talk to each other. That's the point. They're saying, hey, I like this. You might like that. They're not telling me, hey, next time try to do this. Yeah. That's not. I don't want anything to do with this. In terms of reviews, like literary criticism, I started out with I Miss You and I Blink trying not to see reviews at all. Partially just because me being me, I thought there's no review that will ever satisfy me. There's nothing you could say that will quell the endless hunger for approval that I have.
Wait, did you read my review? I wrote a very positive review,
That's why
but we didn't know each other.
So this is the funny story. So I was like, I'm not going to look at reviews, which was very hard because at the time I still worked in marketing for a bookstore, and I still had a show on television about books. So I was very in the online world of book talk. So I would kind of get online every day like this, like, oh, I don't want to see anything about myself. And my husband called me one day from, I guess he was at his office. I don't know where I was, but I remember this phone call because he said, okay, I know you don't want to read reviews, but I need to read you one out loud. And it was your review in the Washington Post of I Miss You When I Blink. And I remember his voice. He was like a child who has just been told the ice cream truck is coming. He was like so excited with every sentence because that review, you got it. You got what I was saying. And he, because he knows me, knew you had gotten it. And he was so happy for me to read it. And I was like crying on the phone. So that was wonderful. Now, I'm a little looser about it. I don't try to avoid them, but I do. I'm not going looking for them. Like, I am not going online Googling myself or my book title. I don't necessarily want to seek out reviews, but, I have this lovely team who has helped get this book into the world, and when they do come across a great review like the one in the New York Times, oh my God, they will send it to me and say, you look at this one, this is good. So, but not Amazon.
You're a very healthy person. That's good for your emotional health. And I promise I didn't ask that question just to prompt information about my own review.
Which was awesome.
Let's take questions. I guess, oh, and let me just tell you how it's going to go. We're going to take some questions, and then Mary Laura is going to read a very short piece at the very end when we're done with questions, just so you know what you're in for, in a good way.
Who's going to get it rolling? Somebody. Somebody's going to.
I have a fun question.
Yes.
It's not too profound, but what does a turtle knocking on your door sound like, and how does that wake you up?
Okay, so the question is, how does it sound when a turtle knocks on your door? It sounds like a person. It's like this. And when it first started, I would get up and open the door, and I was like, those damn kids. I thought someone was like ringing and running because it's really loud, and just like that. To this day, I don't know. I've never seen. I don't know, because we never saw him do it. We would hear it, and then eventually I learned to look down. I would open the door, and he would just be standing there like, hey. And I'm guessing maybe it was his head. What we think was happening is there was a brass kick plate at the bottom of our front door, so it was reflective like a mirror, and we think he was maybe like, you want a piece of me? You want a piece of this? Hey, turtle, and like fighting with himself as a foe, as we do sometimes, fight with ourselves. But it's really loud, and so at 3 a.m., it's a weird thing to hear. That's a great question. Yes.
Yeah, so this is something we're asking quite a few of our event authors, so I'm curious to hear your answer. As you're up for summer, what is your dream summer vacation? Whether it's going to happen this year, as hopefully as COVID cases go down, or just in general?
Dream summer vacation. I want you to answer this too. I'm so easy to please. What I want more than anything is what I have less and less of as time goes by, which is time with my whole family of 4 together. My kids have gotten big. Oddly, they don't want a vacation with me and hang out with me all the time. It's weird. And those are some of my fondest memories of them growing up, is when we would take time off together and not even go anywhere fancy, just like go to the beach or you know, even when they were little and they would have spring break from school, we never went anywhere. We would just hang around the house. And I liked it and I miss it. So I think of ideal vacation and I think of them. I think of the people. I would go anywhere. I'm easy to please. What about you?
Mine is incredibly humble. It's just really a day trip to Asbury Park, also with my kids who are very hard to pin down. When I ask to do something with them, they suddenly have an amazing work ethic. They can't possibly get someone to take over their shift at the local Mexican restaurant. But yeah, a day at Asbury Park, a big bag of books, Korean tacos on the boardwalk. If you guys get down to Asbury, Mogo Tacos, it's definitely worth a visit. Yeah, that's it. Just the beach, preferably Asbury.
Who else? Yes, Ashley.
During your afternoon reading time, were there any titles that stood out that you still to this day remember some great stuff from doing?
Yes. Yeah, okay, so she was asking about my afternoon story time when I would read with a pencil in my hand. There's a book called The Science of Story by Will Storr, and it's about how human brains and minds work and what we want in a story and what keeps us following a story. And that's kind of a dry answer because it's literally a book about storytelling. But I do remember like underlining a lot of it and going, yes, that makes perfect sense. Like there was nothing in it that was surprising. It was all very validating. But it was a good reminder of all our hunches about what works in a story are true. And they're deeply rooted in how human minds work and what we want out of an experience. I also read, at the time I had just, right before the pandemic started, I had just befriended Catherine Center, who is a romantic comedy writer, and she writes these lovely, speaking of like books you would take to the beach, just lovely, always a happy, jolly ending, romance, lots of flirting and kissing books, and she had a new one out, so I was like, I'm going to read this. She was so good at introducing new characters, like just, I could picture her stories playing out on a stage, like this character enters, this one leaves, oh, plot twist. You could diagram her books, and it would be so, and in fact I did, and it would be so entertaining, and you know, that's a very different kind of book than what's going on here, but I remember thinking, she is so good at this, like she must have studied how to tell stories. what else did I read? I feel like I was grabbing books off the shelf by my friend. I think I may have grabbed Camille Perry, one of your books, off my shelf as well, because I love your writing. Just like almost anything is instructive if you read it with a pencil in your hand, because you can also underline, like, don't do this. You know, if it's a chapter that ends badly, you're like, I hate that. No, I'm not going to do that. Did you have a question too?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, is it you're writing kind of personal stuff, and like, how does it feel when you like release it out? Like, did I say too much? Like being vulnerable, or like, is it like the reaction from people, like once it's out?
That's a great question. I've had that question before, and I think the assumption is that I will feel exposed. Like, oh, I've written a memoir, now I feel like everyone can see my naked insides. And it's not so much that. I do have a weird, uncomfortable feeling, but it's different. I feel I very much understand the difference between me, the person you are looking at, the writer who wrote this, existing in real time as a human being, and the me character in this book, who is made up of 32 experiences. There's 32 chapters here. That me character is different in every reader's head. So like to you, she's those experiences, plus you're filling in the gaps with maybe some of your own experiences and some assumptions, and so she's sort of this Frankenstein's monster of what's here and then what you're adding to it. But that's going to look different from your version of that me character. I understand that very well, but it's strange to me sometimes when people come to me with their version of the me character and they're like, I know everything about you. You have told me your whole life, and you must feel exposed because I know all these things. And I think, you know 32 things. You don't know everything. I've been very careful about what I've showed you and not showed you, and that feels strange to me. That's the weirdness when it first comes out.
The Once Upon a Time test?
Yes.
They spoke about? Did you invent that? Because I think it's brilliant.
I don't know. I mean, I did not hear it anywhere else, but I would be surprised if I were the only person who used it. But I find it helpful.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
I feel like there's an essay in the Once Upon a Time test. Does it annoy you when people say that? Like, are you going to write an essay about
It
that?
never annoys me, except every now and then, if something horrible is happening in life. There's been a couple times, like and it's true. I mean, I did write essays about them, but sometimes when something tragic is happening, people will go, "Wow, it's good fodder for your next book, huh?" And on one hand, I'm like, F off. You know, you think I'm writing a book about this right now? I'm living through hell. And on the other hand, I'm like, just going to take some notes. Because it would dovetail nicely with that other thing. You know, you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be fair, that's also how I make sense of the world. My little brain, ever since I was little, and some English teacher taught me, here's the structure of an essay, was like, oh, I love it. You can take chaos and give it a shape. So I do it.
Hey, sorry, you're like Mindy Kaling to me, and like I relate to like your story, so I'm probably gonna black out. But curious, like I'm like an anxious, empathetic worrier, like yourself, I think. And like sometimes when you talk about like the good and the bad, like sometimes the bad is like so overwhelming that you're like paralyzed and you're working on some creative project and you're like, but I'm not solving climate change, like I'm not trying to stop gun violence. Like, do you ever have that like paralysis, and how do you deal with it?
All the time. I mean, that's what a lot of this book is about, is when you start embarking on the journey to save people, and you can't. You know, one of the things I'm struggling with in this book is I can't save my son. I can't cure what is going on. I also, I can't save my daughter from harm in the world. Oh, you know what? I cannot save my parents from the fact that they are getting older and will die before I want them to. And you know what? I also can't stop climate. It just grows that I can't save anything. What is helpful to me, first of all, is acknowledging that I can't do it. It's a bummer that I can't save everyone, but it is true. And once I embrace it and accept it, I can stop struggling and doing the magical thinking where I'm like, yes, I can. If I just think hard enough before I go to bed tonight, I will solve war. But also almost sort of meditatively refocusing on little things, like small acts of caretaking, putting attention into, I mentioned my yard earlier. My yard looks awful. It's just full of weeds and dirt, but I go out there and I'm like, digging this hole for the snake I met the other day needs to get down to this part of the yard, so I'm making him a road. It's silly, but it's like I'm taking care of this one little patch of something I can take care of, and that's something. We can take care of each other. That's something. It helps me to kind of come back to that.
Yes.
What have you been reading lately?
What have I been reading lately? What a good question, Devin. Oh, what have I been reading? I just read Lessons in Chemistry. Wasn't it good? By Bonnie Garmis. My friend KJ Delantonia told me about it, and I loved it. Just came out. I read, what else have I been reading? I blurbed a couple of books that are coming out at the top of the summer that were really good. One is called Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting by Claire Pooley. She's a British author, so it has a different title. In the UK, it's called The People on Platform 5. But here it's called Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting. And it's a similar sort of just feel-good ensemble story, sort of in the way that, Love Actually had the people coming in and out of each other's lives. I just adored it. Great happy beach reading. It almost reads like a movie script. Not a lot of description. She doesn't necessarily do the show don't tell. She'll just tell you like so-and-so was sad. Anyway, move on to the next thing. I loved it. It was a great, quick, easy, wonderful, uplifting read. I also blurbed a book coming out in June called The Mutual Friend by Carter Bays. And Carter Bays is one of the showrunners of How I Met Your Mother. So this is his first book, but obviously not his first time telling a story. And this novel has echoes of that show in that it's, people in the city, another ensemble story, people coming in and out of each other's lives. It started out super entertaining and I just liked it and I was like, oh, this is great fun. And then kind of with each advancing chapter, it got deeper and deeper. And by the end, I was like staring out the window, thinking about the meaning of life, which I think is what I put in my blurb. Like, this is a great book if you like to stare out the window and think about the meaning of life. It has a very unusual narrator. And I won't tell you what it is, but it's unusual. What are you reading?
I draw a blank when somebody asks
I
a
know.
question. You know what? I'm just glancing at this table. One of the books I loved, which I wrote about recently, is Amy Bloom's book, In Love. Oh, I think have you read it?
I can't.
Oh, no,
I want
you can.
to. I can?
Yeah, you can.
It's going to make me sob so hard.
It is.
Tell
it's
what
just,
it is.
It's about Amy Bloom, who is a veteran novelist and definitely worth putting on your radar if she's not already. Her husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and made a decision pretty early on that he wanted to end his own life. So it's the story of their trip to Dignitas in the suburbs of Zurich to make that happen. And it's just incredibly sad, but also it's classic Amy Bloom. It has a ton of humor in it, and I just absolutely loved it. So I had that. I know it sounds like I'm dropping a real depressing bomb in your lap, but I really am not.
It's that bittersweet thing.
It is.
You know?
It is. Yes.
Okay. Here's what we're going to do before I read my thing. I want to take a picture of everyone in this room. If you don't want your picture taken, put something in front of your face.
Do you want to be in the picture? And
No,
I'll take it? Are you sure?
I don't. I just want to remember all these beautiful people in this room. Say 1, 2, 3, I. 1, 2, 3. What?
Do you want people to hold up their book?
Oh, sure. Hold your book up if you like. If you don't have a book, I'll look back and go, these people didn't buy my book.
There's still time.
There's still time. Okay. I would like to leave you with just one paragraph from Bomb Shelter. It happens near the very end, but it does not give anything away.
Want me to
So
hold your
it's-
microphone?
No, I got
Are
it.
you
Look,
sure? You're very dexterous.
I have all these fingers. We take care of who we can and what we can. near and far, because that's the job. That is life. It's true. There will always be threats lurking under the water where we play, danger hiding in the attic and rolling down the street on heavy wheels, unexpected explosions in our brains and our hearts and the sky. There will always be bombs, and we will never be able to save everyone we care about. To know that and to try anyway is to be fully alive. The closest thing to shelter we can offer one another is love, as deep and wide and in as many forms as we can give it. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you again to Mary Laura and Liz. Thank you to everyone who came out tonight. As a reminder, Mary Laura is going to be signing back there at our back desk. So we'll give her a moment to get settled, and then everyone can start forming a line. We're also going to have that back door open to exit through. If you haven't purchased a copy of Bomb Shelter yet, you can do so there. We also have Liz's book and Mary Laura's first book. For those of us who are still with us on YouTube, you can find the link to buy those books in the video description. And for those of us who are in store with us tonight, we ask that you please make your way downstairs once you've purchased your copies so that our staff can begin to break down the space. That's all for me. Thank you again, everyone, and let's give these two one last round of applause.